صباح الخير جميعا. شكرا لحضوركم لهذا المؤتمر الصحفي الخاص باللجنة المعنية بالممارسات الإسرائيلية لحقوق الإنسان للشعب الفلسطيني. اللجنة الخاصة ستقدم تقريرها إلى الدورة 69 للجمعية العامة، وقامت بزيارة إلى عمان والقاهرة والتقت بالعديد من المعنيين للوقوف على هذه الانتهاكات. يرأس اللجنة، سأقوم بإعطاء الحديث للسفراء الثلاثة الذين سيتحدثوا عن خلاصة ما وصلوا إليه، ثم سنفتح المجال للأسئلة. يرأس اللجنة سعادة السفير حسين حنيف، الممثل الدائم لماليزيا لدى الأمم المتحدة في نيويورك، وهو نائب رئيس اللجنة. ثم سعادة السيد فوديسيك، وهو الممثل الدائم للسنغال لدى الأمم المتحدة في جنيف، والسيدة سامانثا جايسوريا، وهي وزير ورئيس القسم القنصلي في سفارة سريلانكا في بروكسل. سأعطي المجال في الأول لسعادة السفير حسين، ثم بالإمكان كما قلت نعطي المجال للأعضاء الآخرين للبعثة، ونبدأ بعد ذلك الأسئلة. Good morning everybody. Thank you for coming to join us in for this press conference that is actually will talk about the results of the special committee on the Israeli practices affecting the human rights of Palestinian people. The committee is headed by Ambassador Hanif Hussein. He is the permanent representative of Malaysia to the United Nations in New York and the acting chair of the special committee. His Excellency Mr. Fodisik, permanent representative of Senegal to the United Nations in Geneva, and Mrs. Samantha Jayasoria, Minister and Head of Chancery at the Embassy of Sri Lanka in Brussels. Ambassador Hussein, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning to all of you, and I wish to thank you for joining us this morning. As you're aware, the special committee to investigate Israel practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories is concluding its annual mission to the region. During the past 5 days in Amman and here in Cairo, this committee has received a number of witnesses, non-governmental organizations, Palestinian government officials, and UN agencies operating in the occupied Palestinian territory and in the occupied Syrian Golan to be briefed on human rights and humanitarian concerns for the purpose of preparing the committee's report to be submitted to the 69th session of the United Nations General Assembly in the fall, this September. Let me begin by expressing the special committee's grave concerns at reports that more than 75 Palestinians, hunger strikers, protesting Israel's continued issue of administrative detention, have been hospitalized due to worsening health conditions. Palestinian detainees are making a desperate plea to be afforded a very basic standards of due process, a standard that should be afforded every human being, to know that one stands accused of and to be able to defend oneself. As you know, today is the 43rd day since the grouping of around 100 Palestinian administrative detainees launched their peaceful protests. According to witnesses' testimonies received by this committee, there are concerns over ill treatment and medical neglect of Palestinian detainees' health by the Israeli prison service, and the health of the Palestinian hunger strikers is fast deteriorating. Our concerns over the health of Palestinian detainees extend more widely. This year again, we received a number of testimonies indicating that medical needs of Palestinians within the Israel prison system have been neglected, in some cases leading to death which might have been avoided with proper care and timely diagnosis. As an urgent first step, we strongly appeal to the Israeli authorities to allow all Palestinian detainees, especially women and children, to be periodically seen by Palestinian doctors in order to avoid losing more lives. The Special Committee also calls on Israel to heed the demands of the hunger strikers to end the practice of administrative detention of Palestinians. International humanitarian law only allows for the use of administrative detention on an exceptional basis. Yet, the Israeli authorities detain a large number of Palestinians on this basis, and administrative detention orders of 6 months period can be renewed an indefinite number of times. In some cases, we were told they have been there for many, many years, 20 to 25 years. The Special Committee is also alarmed by reports that the Israel government is pushing for an early vote on a bill in the Knesset that would allow the forced feeding of the hunger striking detainees. Let me turn now to the general situation of human rights in all Israel-occupied territories, which remains of deep concern to this committee. Settlement expansion continues at an alarming pace and scale, with new policies and procedures allowing for the confiscation of Palestinian land and property. Despite repeated calls by the United Nations and the international community for Israel to comply with international law and to halt and reverse settlements, it chooses to turn a deaf ear. Next month will mark the 10th anniversary of the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on the wall. That opinion clearly stated that unlawful nature under international law of the wall in the occupied Palestinian territory and its associated regime of permit systems, gates, and barriers that restrict the freedom of movement of Palestinians. In the West Bank, we heard troubling personal accounts of excessive use of force by Israeli security forces against Palestinian children, especially in and around refugee camps. In the latest such killings, on 15th May, Israel security forces allegedly shot and killed the two boys aged 16 and 17, who, as documented by CCTV footage, presented no direct track at the time that they were killed. Statistics provided to the committee indicate that during the 10 years from 2003 to 2013, of 179 criminal investigations opened into cases of death of Palestinians allegedly caused by the Israeli security forces, there were only 16 indictments, just 7 convictions. The number speaks for themselves. Witnesses also briefed the committee on how Bedouin communities are being forced off their land through settlers' violence, land seizures, and demolition orders. In the absence of protection by Israel and of accountability for perpetrators, we were informed that settlers' violence and price tag attacks also continued unabated, including on religious places of worship such as churches and mosques. It is not a human existence for their children, women, and men to be living under such constant threats. The physiological social impact of settlers' violence, particularly on children, can be devastating and a lifelong burden. We also heard from a new generation of young and energetic representatives of non-governmental organizations actively working to report on those international companies profiting from their involvement in activities related to the settlement enterprise. The committee was briefed on the continuing exploitation and pillage of natural resources in Palestine by Israel and international companies. The involvement of specific companies will be further detailed in our report to the General Assembly in the fall. In Gaza, the situation was described by witnesses as dire, and it was questioned whether the United Nations projection that Gaza might not be livable in 2020 at this point might even be too optimistic. The unsustainability of the current water crisis and the soaring unemployment result from Israel's land and maritime blockade. Israel's enforcement of the excess restrictive areas further deprives farmers and fishermen of their livelihoods. We heard that fishing off the shore of Gaza remains severely restricted, and that the confiscation of fishermen's boats and equipment by Israel naval forces imposes huge financial costs. It is difficult to see how Gazans would be able to continue living under present conditions for much longer. This committee once again calls on Israel to immediately lift the blockade of the Gaza Strip. Let me conclude on a positive note by saying that in the face of such monumental hardships on the Palestinian people, the Special Committee welcomes the resolve on the part of the Palestinian leadership to unite the West Bank and Gaza under one Palestinian government. Thank you for your question. The UN, as this special committee, we have been submitting reports on an annual basis calling for the lifting of the blockade. But unfortunately, these recommendations, if you look at our reports, there are many recommendations that we put in, but it has not been implemented by Israel. They simply refuse. In fact, they don't even recognize the special committee. But one thing important is that the special committee is the place where we can highlight what is the problem on the ground. And I had that opportunity 2 years ago with my colleague, Ambassador Sek, to go to Gaza through Rafah. And that was the first time both of us entered into Gaza. And it was really shocking. This was 2 years ago, to see things on the grounds with your own eyes. We met with fishermen on how they are having difficulties to fish. they are not allowed to go beyond 3 nautical miles. And if they go beyond that, then they will be shot at or their boats will be confiscated. And so they have no means of livelihood. And you can see from the results, the tonnage of fish has been depleting from year to year. And they can't even export those products. The same is with the farmers, because most of the fertile agricultural land, 35% is in the security zone, the buffer zone. And some farmers can't even go to their own field to farm. And there have been cases where some were shot and died in the process. So it is unattainable in terms of the water, clean water, in terms of electricity, shortage of power, medical equipment, housing. There is no construction because everything, building materials have to be cleared by Israel before it can be done. So only under UN or UNRWA projects, there are limited allowance of building materials. But the general public, the people are not able to build houses if it was destroyed. And so they are living in a very, very difficult situation. The unemployment level is like 40%. And that's huge. The young generation, the youth, have no opportunity to work. There are no private sector that's able to function under such an environment because they have no market for their products. They do not have facilities to conserve their products. So all that coupled the problem that we see, despite that we were not able to visit Gaza this year, but from what we have seen the last 2 years and from the testimony that we have received from people from Gaza through Skype, the situation is getting worse. For me, I've been in this committee for the last 3 years, and every time we meet, we find the situation is getting worse and worse and worse, not improving at all. And there will be a time where the situation will be unbearable and very difficult to continue. So I think what we can do is to continue to highlight the problems of the people. That is our mandate by the General Assembly resolution. We will submit this report to the General Assembly for their consideration, and that we are glad that the press will be able to also outreach to convey this information that we have for the general public, for more public awareness, because I think Gaza is now under total blockade because there's no report about what's happening actually on the ground. There's no television network covering what is happening in Gaza. So the world does not really know what's happening in Gaza. Only those who have the opportunity to visit will see it for themselves. And since we had that opportunity in the past, we would like to have more public awareness of the situation, because even the UN report says that the livelihood, like by 2020, the projection was it won't have any more, but they say it might even be earlier because of the situation is getting worse. I hope I've answered your question. Well, we have heard testimony about problems related to women and children, because there are also women and children that are in detention and who are in prison. And so the living conditions in prisons and for the kids and children is not conducive for the upbringing of the child. So it is always the women and the children that suffers most when there is a situation of demolition of their houses, or destruction of their crops, because they are the main, the women in Palestinian culture is an important aspect of community. And so the committee will also look at how we can do something to help the women and children. And the children are the future of Palestine. They should have appropriate, proper education, and a lot have stopped going to school because of poverty. They are not able to go to school because they have to work in order to support their family. And this is something we feel that the child should be given that opportunity to study and have good education so that they are brought up. And so when we are having more children of young age working, especially in Gaza, collecting things that can be sold to get some money on a daily basis. So in the UN context too, it's always women and child is in the third committee has become a very important subject. We are talking about the rights of women and children, and so at this stage, it seems that the rights of the woman and child in Palestine is not receiving the appropriate attention that they should be given those rights. Well, in our report, we have highlighted about illegal settlement, which is against international law in occupied territory. But we see that the numbers of illegal settlement is increasing by the weeks and by the months. And this is really hindering the peace process for a two-state solution, because most of these illegal settlements are in the occupied territory. So this is against international law, and in our report we highlight this to say that we cannot recognize the illegal settlements, because the settlement is not only illegal, but the people who are in the settlement also do what you call settlers violence against Palestinians in the surrounding area. And that is again another human rights issue, because their crops are destroyed, olive trees are destroyed, and then they do not have a livelihood, including their homes, including the Bedouins who are moving from place to place, and they have no more place to do their traditional way of life. On the unity government, as you can, we have welcomed that, because this is what we would like to see: one Palestine, united Palestine government, and that we hope that with this unity, where we have Palestine as one entity rather than the West Bank or Gaza, it will contribute towards the positive peace process that will make, and we look forward for the peace process to continue, and that we will be able to achieve what we have been discussing for a very long time: a two-state solution, the state of Palestine and the state of Israel living side by side in peace and security.
Assalamu alaikum. The chairman has said it all. Just to highlight a few more points. The three questions raised here. What this committee can only, besides of this press conference, report to the General Assembly through the Fourth Committee of the UN. UN decisions are here to be known and seen by everybody, but the problem is how to implement them. There being no supranational body to impose implementation, the situation remains as it is. So that's why the role of you people, the press people, is fundamental, to try and extract what is of interest in the report, in our report, and make it known. The Ambassador Hussein just said that most of the government don't actually know what is on the ground. The example is the complicity of international foreign companies helping or cooperating with Israeli companies to exploit the Palestinian resources. One way of bringing more awareness is to maybe identify on the process, as it be highlighted in our report, those foreign companies that operate in most of our countries also, to expose them, telling them, look, you are associating with an enterprise exploiting Palestinian resources. It is illegal. And it might someday, you might someday be brought to book, like we did in Africa to bring down the apartheid regime, exposing, calling for boycott and other measures. So your role is fundamental. Yesterday we met the Arab League and to to respond to this lady's question, we knew just at the Arab League that the first youngest doctor in the world happened to be a Palestinian woman. I didn't know that. Our committee didn't know that. It is fantastic. So if women and the youth are better protected, I think the whole situation will be better off. One last point is the cultural heritage of Palestine, which is among one of the richest in the world, is being undermined. I think if you, the press, can highlight those issues, the world will listen, eventually government will listen, and even countries that can leverage the influence on the occupying power can react better. Thank you.
Thank you.